The first light of morning spilled over the city of Ouagadougou, the golden sun stretching its fingers across the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows over the towering walls of the government palace, where history itself seemed to pause, holding its breath. Inside, President Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old yet already a figure of revolutionary change, was beginning what he thought would be a day of routine state affairs, unaware that within the next few hours he would confront the most explosive revelation in Burkina Faso's modern history, one that would not only redefine his leadership but could alter the fate of the African continent. Far from the grand corridors of the palace, deep inside the Ministry of Finance, the air was thick with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights as the Special Audit Commission, led by the meticulous and unflinching Professor Amadou Saadou, worked through a mountain of documents that told a story so staggering it defied belief, their hands moving methodically yet their eyes betraying a growing unease, as they uncovered, page by page, the anatomy of an economic crime that had spanned decades. There were bank statements that bled numbers like open wounds, loan agreements whose fine print hid poisoned hooks, and project reports describing grand developments, roads that had never been paved, hospitals that existed only in photographs, schools that were nothing but phantom lines in a budget, each sheet of paper a silent witness to betrayal. It was Dr. Fatima Urego, one of the Commission's lead economists, who broke the heavy silence, her voice trembling as she held up a single sheet that could topple governments, a classified protocol, signed in 2019, secretly pledging 40% of Burkina Faso's gold reserves as collateral to the World Bank, an agreement so damning it had been deliberately hidden from Parliament, the press, and the public, its existence known only to a handful of insiders who had sold their nation's wealth for personal gain. As the team dug deeper, a sinister pattern emerged like ink spreading through water. Since 1960, Burkina Faso had repaid an astonishing $23 billion, a sum 15 times the original amount borrowed, yet the people had nothing to show for it but broken promises, crumbling infrastructure, and a debt chain forged not by necessity, but by design. The evidence laid bare the reality of a financial war, a campaign of exploitation so precise and sustained that it had kept the country trapped in poverty while enriching foreign institutions and their local collaborators, and among the files were the smoking guns, commission payment records, bribery receipts, offshore bank statements, all proving a web of corruption stretching across continents. On the morning of the handover, Saadou walked through the palace corridors with the weight of a nation pressing down on his shoulders. The manila folder in his hand, a weapon more dangerous than any rifle, its contents powerful enough to shake the global order. Palace guards stood at attention as he passed, unaware that the man before them carried in his grasp the truth their enemies had spent generations burying. In his office, President Traoré was reviewing mundane administrative matters when Saadou knocked, stepped inside, and with steady hands but a pounding heart, placed the folder on the desk. "Mr. President," he began, his voice low yet unyielding, "we have completed our audit of the World Bank agreements, and what we found is beyond anything we imagined." And as Traoré flipped through the pages, the transformation on his face was unmistakable. Curiosity melted into shock, shock hardened into fury, and fury settled into the cold resolve of a man who had just seen the chains that had bound his people. "They've been robbing us blind," he whispered, his voice heavy with the weight of 60 stolen years, "keeping us poor while they grow rich from our resources." The room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the walls themselves were listening, as the president paced to the tall window, looking out at the streets of Ouagadougou where ordinary citizens moved about, oblivious to the tidal wave of truth about to crash over their nation. This was no longer about balance sheets or hidden clauses. This was about sovereignty, dignity, and the survival of Africa's future, and in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré knew the fight ahead would not just be political or economic, but a battle for the soul of his people, one he could not and would not lose. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on the room as President Ibrahim Traoré, his jaw set with unshakable resolve, turned back to Professor Amadou Saadou and said, his voice deliberate and firm, "Professor, prepare copies of every single piece of this evidence, every document, every receipt, every hidden clause. Make sure it's all verified and untouchable." He paused, the silence between them sharp as a blade, then continued, "And summon the World Bank's West Africa Regional Director to the palace, immediately." Saadou, though already knowing the answer, still asked quietly, "Sir, are you certain about this course of action?" Traoré's reply came like the first crack of thunder before a storm. "They believe they can keep plundering Africa without consequence, that we are too weak, too divided to fight back. They are about to learn they were wrong." Word of the unprecedented summons raced through diplomatic channels, setting embassies buzzing and foreign ministries scrambling. Within the palace, the air thickened with anticipation as staff moved with unusual urgency, discreetly reinforcing security while whispering about the history that might be written that day, a direct confrontation between a young African leader and the most powerful financial institution on earth. A showdown that could either free a nation or crush it. By afternoon, the scorching sun blazed over Ouagadougou as a convoy of black SUVs cut through the streets, their tinted windows glinting under the relentless heat. James Morrison, the World Bank's West Africa Regional Director, sat in the lead vehicle, his expression betraying only mild irritation at being dragged into what he assumed was another African leader's plea for assistance. With over 2 decades of experience managing the bank's African portfolio, Morrison was accustomed to deference, even gratitude. This felt different, though he could not yet grasp how different. As the motorcade entered the palace gates, he noticed the shift immediately. More guards than usual, all standing rigid at attention, their eyes sharp and unblinking. Gone was the casual warmth of typical African diplomatic receptions. This atmosphere was taut, formal, almost military in its precision. Inside, in the grand conference room, the stage had been set for psychological impact. At the head of a long mahogany table sat President Traoré, the damning folders arranged neatly before him like ammunition, and behind him the flag of Burkina Faso stood tall beside the portrait of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary martyr who had dared to defy the same forces now seated across from his successor. Morrison entered with his 5-member delegation, expecting polite greetings and ceremonial tea, but instead he was met with an unbroken silence and the unwavering gaze of a man who looked as if he were preparing for battle. Traoré did not stand, did not smile. His words, when they came, were cold steel. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice slicing clean through the air, "please sit down. We have much to discuss."